by her 2010 Senate loss and her bizarre, countless primary campaign this year. Markedly blessed and cursed with an image of an alpha technocrat. Well, that's what you don't want to be. Did not mention welfare, a staple of his TV ads. That was old Charlie Baker. He stressed the similarities. Wait a minute here. The similarities. Let me get you where his similarities are. Between his stance and on Coakley's expanding of pre-K, but flashes of testiness kept showing through. Favoritism for political insiders is what drives people crazy. Baker said, well, Baker is the ultimate inside man, as we said earlier. It makes me nuts, he said, to run into people harmed by federal inactivity on immigration. Well, this is appealing to the right wing, the perception that he cares more about numbers. We already talked about that. Meanwhile, Coakley seemed to be finishing strong until recently. Her campaign strategy made her appear defensive. There was no reason for that. Weary of jeopardizing her front row stance, close to her party's nomination. There's no doubt about that. Look at this and look at that. For the general election, another train wreck seemed possible. Martha-Coakley, well, anyway, known as Martha-Coakley. On Wednesday, a few laughing lines. Well, we didn't care for that. Just don't tell me, sweetheart. Well, don't call me, excuse me. That's what Charlie Baker said. That's not a big deal, him calling somebody sweetheart. As it is other things. The Pop Warner game in Dorchester with a Boston cop. Well, that whole scheme that he went through there is bizarre in itself. Nonetheless, on to the debate and enjoy. This is one of a series of debates we've been presenting in their entirety, and also at the same time providing a little commentary. Some of our commentary mashed with some of the columnists at the Globe there who were trying to match that. We didn't go to the Herald, or it used to be the Herald American, to get their commentary on this. We were remiss, but in our programming coming up, we'll get those. And also, another note, many of the debates now are starting to wind down. This is the final one, and several other final ones we'll be covering, and we'll get all the debates up hopefully by this weekend. We have some, and we just need to add the commentary to them. Good day.
It's 2 weeks until Election Day, and we hope the next 60 minutes will help you decide your vote for governor.
We intend to cover a lot of ground, and the only thing we can tell you about the format is that there isn't one. It's just a conversation with the two leading candidates for governor.
And please feel free to talk to each other as often as you like.
We'll also be going to some questions from our partners at the Boston Globe. They're already talking to each other. So, Charlie, Martha, we really appreciate your joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Marjorie, shall we?
So you're both running as job creator-in-chief, and you both have plans explaining how you're going to do that. But Martha, first, you've been working in the public sector for 28 years, obviously not creating private sector jobs there. So how do you convince people that you can do this for them in the private sector?
Well, first of all, what's been really important in my experience is seeing what barriers are to job creation in the private sector, how overregulation or energy costs, healthcare costs are barriers to that. I've seen that as Attorney General. And I also understand what the state has been able to do, like the governor has with investments in life sciences, to spur job creation, to work as a good partner with schools, and to provide for the growth in the economy that we see happening already. And I think one of the differences, between the two of us is I see the need to keep those jobs going, but also the real need to invest in our workforce so that our kids and people will have the jobs and the job skills to keep them here.
So, Charlie, what do you think of that plan?
Well, I think the big issue we do face is jobs. I mean, it's the number one issue for people everywhere we go. And as I've traveled around the Commonwealth, it's very clear to me that some parts of Massachusetts are doing really well and other parts aren't. And a big part of our economic development plan is focused on those regions and those communities that have not done as well as others. And that's why we've been talking about building economies based on the jobs that are already in certain parts of Massachusetts. And it's why, for example, my first campaign event was at UMass Lowell at the Emerging Technology Center, because that is a great public-private partnership between the plastics and polymer manufacturing industry up in the Merrimack Valley and UMass Lowell. And it's created this really terrific virtuous circle between a higher ed institution that provides research and product development expertise to a bunch of firms that want to be here and want to grow here. And it's a great pathway for kids who go through that school into those companies when they graduate. And we should do more of those, build on what we have region by region.
Well, and sure, and that's why I have a regional economic development plan that does precisely that in 13 regions, aligning what's happening in our schools already with curriculum, with making sure that as we roll out $500 million over the next 10 years, we will build an economy from the ground up, one that's sustainable, one that invests in our kids and our workforce so that we won't have jobs going begging as we do now, and we won't have people unemployed as we do now.
Charlie, when you rescued Harvard Pilgrim, you also outsourced jobs to India, and you shut down an operation in Rhode Island that cost about 1,200 jobs. So the same question I asked to Martha, I asked to you. Why should people have confidence that you can create the jobs you claim you can in the private sector, public sector?
Well, Harvard Pilgrim, as most people know, was in terrible shape when I got there. And I'm proud of the fact that we managed to rescue not only the jobs associated with Harvard Pilgrim, but the jobs associated with many other healthcare organizations that would have failed if Harvard Pilgrim had gone down as well. And by the way, when we signed that contract with Perot, we outsourced those jobs to Wellesley and to Quincy. And that's where the vast majority of the people who'd been working continued to be employed. And I'm proud of the fact that we saved their jobs along with the thousands of jobs at Harvard Vanguard, which is one of the premier healthcare provider institutions in eastern Massachusetts, and saved the jobs of thousands of hospitals that may have failed if Harvard Pilgrim had gone down as well. I mean, in some respects, yeah, we had to make some tough decisions. But leadership requires you to make tough decisions. And I said many times that the hardest decision I had to make was to exit the Rhode Island marketplace. But even there, I'm proud of the fact that everybody we owed money to got paid. Everybody who was in active treatment, we continued to serve and make sure they got transitioned properly. And that everybody who was employed by us who lost their job, we provided job training and technical assistance and job placement too, and the vast majority of those people ended up getting hired by somebody else.
You know, before you respond, just one quick thing about the outsourcing. I get, your explanation that you needed to do that to save Harvard Pilgrim. What I don't get, though, is the picture I saw you, Charlie, when you got dressed up in a tuxedo and you got an award, an outsourcing excellence award, like there was something to celebrate about outsourcing jobs out of the country. What were you thinking? Why did you do that?
Well, first of all, the outsourcing award was for the partnership we had with Perot. And remember, those jobs stayed here in Massachusetts. And it was a big part of the success we had in taking an organization that was fundamentally broken, in many ways a lot like many parts of state government are today, and turning it around and making it work for everyone, making it work for the members of Harvard Pilgrim, making it work for the providers that did business with Harvard Pilgrim, making it work for the employees of both Harvard Pilgrim and Perot. Look, we saved thousands of jobs and kept them right here in Massachusetts as a result of saving that company, and we also saved the jobs of many other organizations that would have failed if we'd gone under.
But Marjorie's questions were about any history of job creation in either of your resumes, and should I assume from your answer and yours that you don't have any? That you preserve jobs by what you did there. You were primarily a public sector person for the last 3 decades. So in terms of actual job creation, the experience is limited in both cases. Is that a fair statement?
That's not the only thing I've done for work, okay? I mean, I also spent 8 years working in the Weldon-Salucci administration, during which time between tax cuts, workers' comp reform, and a host of other reforms, we took a state that had the highest unemployment rate when we took office in 1991 to the lowest unemployment rate in the country by the time Paul Salucci left 10 years later, and we created 500,000 net new jobs in Massachusetts over that period, something I'm very proud of.
Briefly, why do you disagree, martha-Coakley?
Because the public sector doesn't necessarily create jobs, but the public sector plays a big role in how jobs are created. Now, they're filled. I'll give you one example.
Please.
A company in Fitchburg that had very expensive energy rates. They wanted to do on-site outsourcing of energy production. We helped them cut red tape so they could put up a wind turbine. And because of that, helping them do that, they saved money. They hired 300, 400 more people in that Simon's factory.
One last quick job thing before we move on. As he prepares to leave office, the Globe has reported Governor Patrick is shifting 500 employees from managerial positions to a public employee union, in essence, tying the hands of the next governor, particularly if it's a person of the other party, and insulating them from removal. Either of you have a problem with what the governor did in the waning days of his administration? Martha, starting with you.
First of all, I wasn't involved in that negotiation.
No, I understand that. But
yeah, and
with that?
I don't know. I think the governor needs to be more transparent about what actually happened. And until we have that what and why, I think he needs to explain that.
Your guy you worked for did some of the same thing to a lesser degree, Bill Weld. Are you troubled by what Deval Patrick did?
Yeah, I am. 500 people out of a management workforce that's roughly 3,000 people. You're talking about almost 1/6 of the managers in state government. The fact that it happened 2 weeks before an election and 2 months before the end of an administration. And so far, there's no publicly available explanation about what agencies are affected or how they're affected.
But I
worry a lot about what
we need
this...
to know those facts.
Well, but I also worry a lot about the message this sends. I mean, one of the things that makes people crazy about government, especially state government, is that there's two sets of rules. One for the people who are on the inside and one for all the people who pay the bills. Look at something like the probation scandal, where day after day we had to listen to testimony that indicated that a whole bunch of people got jobs not because of what they knew, but because of who they knew. And to this day, I'm still the only candidate for governor who actually put out a proposal to make transparent the process through which Massachusetts state government hires people, and creating a process to make sure that the public understands who gets the jobs and why. And I think that's a big difference, frankly, between me and the Attorney General.
Very briefly.
So let's just go back about transparency, about big dig financing, putting the financing, kicking that can down the road, being transparent about letting go 700 Department of Mental Health workers, outsourcing that as mental health. So I'm happy to stand on my record. I didn't have anything to do with that particular decision, but let's be transparent about our own records and the decisions we've made and the values that drive those decisions. That's what's at stake in this race.
Let's move on to taxes again. Charlie, you said you won't raise taxes unless they're offset by lowering taxes somewhere else. Is that correct?
Yep. If
And
we want
Martha,
to simplify the code, I'm all for it.
Martha says you will only consider taxes as a last resort to protect services that you deem critical. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair as far as it goes.
Charlie, let me start with you for a minute. Why would a good manager like you take anything off the table before taking office? You didn't take revenues off the table at Harvard Pilgrim. In fact, you used them. You raised premiums pretty dramatically, which helped you achieve your goal. Why do you take a solution, even if it's not your favorite one, off the table before you even take office?
We raised it. We also grew our membership by 40% while I was there, and took a company that was bankrupt and made it the #1 carrier in the country for member satisfaction and customer service for 7 years in a row. I mean, we made a ton of operating improvements as well, the kinds of things that I think state government could use a good solid dose of right now.
But one of your tools was 150%.
Look, I think it's important to send a message to employers, small businesses, everybody in Massachusetts, many of whom feel they've been nickel and dime to death over the course of the past few years, that we're not going to just raise taxes to figure out how to pay the bills. Somewhere we have to draw the line. Think about energy costs. Next month, families and businesses in Massachusetts are going to be dealing with a 40% increase in their energy costs because the Commonwealth of Mass, Governor, DPU, and frankly the Attorney General, who's supposed to be the ratepayer advocate, didn't do the work that they should have done to deal with the fact that we knew we were taking 3 coal-fired plants out of production, which is fine, but therefore we needed to build additional capacity to deal with that. And what we should have been doing as a Commonwealth is moving forward to simply expand existing natural gas pipelines from 3 feet to 4 feet, which is a pretty simple process, so that people wouldn't get hit with those increases.
Martha?
That's the kind of thing that bothers.
So first of all, that's a market issue, not a taxpayer issue about the availability of natural gas.
It's a cost question, which affects our ability to
but you're
create
talking
jobs.
about taxes, and that was that. But so let me just respond to that, because back in 2010, and now you're for it, but back in 2010 you were against Cape Wind. In the last 4 years, when you have not been on the scene, I, as the ratepayer advocate over the last 8 years, have brought back $700 million on behalf of consumers, standing up to Unidol, to National Grid, to making sure that none of those costs were passed along. We have come much farther along in clean and energy technologies than we would have thought 4 years ago. So we need to catch up. I agree with that. But you can't take this one season and say that either I or the governor haven't done our job in moving towards energy efficiency, which we've done an enormous amount on, and clean technology that we're leading the country.
Before I get to you on taxes, does your no new tax thing include no new fees, Charlie Baker, or the yes or no question?
I guess it depends upon which fee you're talking about and what it's associated with.
Okay.
But I got to say, the governor, the Attorney
please.
General has over $1 billion of new spending of one type or another that she's already proposed. She's going to have to figure out how to pay for it.
Well, a number of people are saying if you total up the numbers, ultimately you do have to raise revenue. Here's your quote, Martha-Coakley. If I had to raise revenues, I'd look to revenue options that do not increase the burden on the middle class and those least able to afford it. Give us a couple examples of, not small change examples, serious examples of ways you could do that without increasing the burden on the middle class and those least able to afford it.
But look, both my opponent and I, and Charlie has refused to take a no new taxes pledge. So let's be honest about what we're both talking about. I've been straightforward in saying, I think in order to move forward, we need to invest.